a long-term historical perspective, China is ready to work with the UK to transcend differences, respect each other, and turn the vast potential of bilateral cooperation into tangible outcomes. This will open new prospects for China-UK relations, deliver benefits to both peoples, and contribute to global peace and development. President Xi said mutual trust is the foundation of stable and enduring state-to-state relations. China has always followed the path of peaceful development. It has never started a war nor occupied an inch of foreign land. No matter how it develops, China will never pose a threat to other countries. With a cultural tradition that values harmony and diversity, China sees its economic and trade cooperation with the UK as inherently mutually beneficial. As China embarks on its 15th five-year plan, President Xi called on both sides to expand cooperation in education, healthcare, finance and services, and to jointly advance research and industrial application in fields such as artificial intelligence, bioscience, new energy, and low-carbon technology, aiming for shared development and prosperity. He expressed China's hope that the UK will provide a fair, just and non-discriminatory business environment for Chinese enterprises. As two major cultural nations that have significantly contributed to human progress, China and the UK should further enhance people-to-people exchanges and facilitate travel. China welcomes more visits from the UK government, parliamentary and local delegations to gain a comprehensive, objective and accurate understanding of the country, and is willing to actively consider granting unilateral visa-free entry to British citizens. President Xi noted that rising unilateralism, protectionism and power politics have seriously impacted the international order. Xi stressed international law can only be effective when all countries abide by it, and major nations in particular must lead by example, otherwise the world risks sliding back into the law of the jungle. As supporters of multilateralism and free trade, China and the UK should jointly advocate and practice true multilateralism, promote a more just and equitable global governance system, and work towards an equal, orderly, multipolar world and inclusive, beneficial globalization. Prime Minister Keir Starmer conveyed greetings from His Majesty King Charles to President Xi. He expressed his pleasure to be the first British Prime Minister to visit China in 8 years, leading a delegation of over 60 representatives from British business, industry and cultural sectors, a demonstration of the breadth of UK-China cooperation and the UK's commitment to deepening engagement with China. As major global economies and permanent UN Security Council members, Starmer said that amid today's turbulent and fragile international situation, it is crucial for the UK and China to establish a long-term, consistent, comprehensive strategic partnership based on mutual respect and trust. He reaffirmed that the UK's long-standing policy on Taiwan remains unchanged. The UK is ready to maintain high-level engagements with China, strengthen dialogue, and enhance cooperation in trade, investment, finance, environmental protection, and other areas to support mutual economic growth and benefit both peoples. Starmer noted that closer people-to-people exchanges deepen mutual understanding, and the UK is willing to promote exchanges between legislative bodies and other sectors. He added that Hong Kong's prosperity and stability serve the common interests of both sides, and the UK welcomes Hong Kong's role as a unique and important bridge between the UK and China. Recognizing China's key role in international affairs, Starmer said the UK is willing to strengthen cooperation with China on global challenges such as climate change and to jointly uphold world peace and stability.
China and the UK have reached numerous agreements during Prime Minister Starmer's visit. The two countries agreed to establish a high-level climate and nature partnership and resume their high-level security dialogue. They will hold a new round of mechanism dialogues this year, including the strategic dialogue, the economic and financial dialogue, and the Joint Economic and Trade Committee meeting. They have also agreed in principle to resume exchanges between their legislative bodies. Both sides will hold a China-UK Business Council meeting and agree to strengthen bilateral trade and investment cooperation. On top of that, the sides welcomed the establishment of the China-UK Financial Working Group and the convening of its first meeting. China says it's also considering implementing a unilateral visa-free policy for British citizens. Meanwhile, it halved the import tariff rate on whiskey to 5%. The sides also signed a dozen intergovernmental cooperation documents in areas such as economy and trade, agriculture and food, culture, market supervision, and law enforcement cooperation. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order threatening new tariffs on countries supplying oil to Cuba. It follows Trump's statement that the U.S. would cut off Cuba's oil imports from its primary supplier, Venezuela. Trump signed the executive order under a national emergency declaration. The move puts Cuba's struggling economy under more stress and increases pressure on Mexico, which has already reduced oil shipments to Cuba. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel says Washington has no moral authority to force a deal on Cuba. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington supports regime change in Cuba, but stops short of confirming U.S. involvement.
Will you make a public commitment today to rule out U.S. regime change in Cuba?
Regime change?
Yes.
Oh, no, I think we would love to see the regime there change. We would like to, that doesn't mean that we're going to make it change, but we would love to see it change. There's no doubt about the fact that it would be of great benefit to the United States if Cuba was no longer governed by an autocratic regime.
But you know what we mean by regime change. We don't mean, I wish someone else were in charge. When we talk about regime change, we're talking about using the power of the United States, usually kinetic power, but often other kinds of coercion. And I'm not even saying that that's always not in our interest. I'm just saying, I'm not asking you whether we would prefer a different kind of government. I'm asking whether you are trying to precipitate the fall of the current regime.
Yeah, but that's statutory. The Helms-Burton Act, the U.S. embargo on Cuba is codified. It was codified in law, and it requires regime change in order for us to lift the embargo.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he's planning to talk to Iran and hopes there won't be any need for military action. The U.S. is sending more military assets to the Middle East as it tries to get Iran back to negotiations on a new nuclear deal. Trump pulled the U.S. out of the 2015 Iran deal during his first term. A guided missile destroyer, the USS Delbert D. Black, was tracked sailing through the Suez Canal towards the Gulf on Wednesday. At least 10 U.S. warships are now believed to be stationed in the Middle East. Iran has announced that it will hold live fire exercises on Sunday and Monday in the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for nearly 20% of the world's oil and natural gas. Tehran's Mayor Alireza Zaghani says underground parking lots and metro stations are being transformed into war shelters. Eshan Kivani has the details from Tehran.
Iran has issued a strong response to escalating rhetoric from the United States, with senior officials warning against any potential military action while laying out firm conditions for a return to nuclear diplomacy. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, responding to recent remarks by U.S. President Donald Trump, said any aggression against Iran would be met with a swift and decisive response, pointing to what he described as the country's heightened defensive readiness. Araghchi reiterated Tehran's openness to diplomatic engagement, but stressed that any future nuclear talks must be conducted without threats or pressure. He said negotiations would only be possible on the basis of equality and mutual respect. Here are the latest remarks by Iran's foreign ministry.
We are honest in negotiation and resolute in defense. We will not be passive in the face of threats or aggression. To any violation, our armed forces will respond decisively and regrettably.
The message was reinforced by Ali Shamkhani, a senior Iranian security official who warned that the U.S. military action would be viewed as the start of a full-scale war. He said such a move would trigger an immediate and unprecedented response from Iran, including the possibility of expanding the conflict beyond Iran's borders. The heightened rhetoric comes as Iranian authorities restore nationwide internet access following a blackout that's lasted more than 2 weeks. The shutdown was imposed during a wave of violent protests across the country. The tensions are unfolding a challenging economic backdrop. The Iranian currency, the rial, hit a record low this week, trading at around 1.6 million rials to the US dollar. Ehsan Keivani, CGTN, Tehran.
Tehran has strongly condemned the European Union for designating Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. Iran says the move is provocative and a major strategic mistake. The EU has also rolled out sanctions targeting individuals and entities it says are responsible for serious human rights violations. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas says recent protests across Iran accelerated the decision. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has denied the existence of an agreement between NATO and the U.S. over Greenland. President Trump claimed in Davos that he had reached an agreement with NATO on Greenland last week. Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen also denied an agreement, adding instead that talks between Denmark, Greenland, and the U.S. have been constructive but inconclusive. Tension spiked as Trump threatened to seize the Danish territory by force. But the U.S. president has since backed away from military threats, launching diplomatic talks instead. Well, that is it for this edition of The World Today. I will be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching. Niger's military ruler blames external forces, including France, for sponsoring Thursday morning's attack on Niamey's international airport. The African Union calls for dialogue as fears grow of more violence in the northern Tigray region. And several Nigerian troops are killed in an Islamist militant attack in the northern state of Borno. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Coming up in business, Uganda's government revises 2026 growth projections downwards. And in sports, Senegal defends its team, players, and coach following heavy sanctions from CAF over the AFCON finals chaos. Once again, a very warm welcome to Africa Live. We begin in Niger, where calm has returned to the capital, Niamey, after reports of sustained gunfire and loud explosions near the city's main airport. Niger's Ministry of National Defense says shooting began in the early hours of Thursday morning by a group of mercenaries who were on a mission sponsored from outside. General Abdurrahman Tiani, who's serving as the country's leader, accused France, Benin, and Côte d'Ivoire of being the sponsors. The three nations are yet to comment on the claims. CGTN's Sophia Shimachero reports.
The Diori Hamani International Airport in Niamey was the center of attention in military-led Niger early Thursday. The airport is located about 10 kilometers from the presidential palace. It also houses a Nigerian Air Force base, a newly built drone base, and the headquarters of a joint force formed by the Alliance of Sahel States. Niger's Defense Ministry says 4 military personnel were injured in the incident, adding that 11 attackers were arrested while 20 others killed. According to state television, a French national was among them. General Abdurrahman Tiani commended all the security forces, including its Russian partners, for repelling the attack.
This is an opportunity for us to make contact with all the defense and security forces, as well as our Russian partners, for their prompt reaction. A reaction that allowed the enemy to be completely routed within 20 minutes. Some were neutralized on the spot, others were neutralized in their panicked rout. We congratulate all the defense and security forces who knew how to coordinate their action.
Niger, along with its neighbors Mali and Burkina Faso, continue to face persistent attacks from armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. The violence has killed thousands and displaced millions across the Sahel region. With Niger's government pointing to outside sources for the recent attack, could it mean additional security concerns for the nation? Sophia Shimachero, CGTN.
And to Nigeria now, where several soldiers have died after Islamist militants attacked an army base in Borno State. According to a military spokesman, the militants, who are affiliated with the Islamic State West Africa Province, or ISWAP, launched a coordinated strike using armed drones in the early hours of Thursday. He said the militants breached the base's perimeter and damaged military assets before the army regained control with reinforcements. Security sources report that at least 9 soldiers and 2 members of a civilian joint task force members were killed. About 16 other troops were wounded. It's the second attack in the region in a week and comes amid ongoing military efforts to counter the long-standing threat posed by Islamist militant groups. Still in Nigeria, the abduction of 163 Christians during coordinated attacks on 2 churches in the northwest Nigeria earlier this month drew more global attention on the nation's security challenges. The assaults, carried out by armed men while church services were ongoing, triggered widespread condemnation and reignited fears about the safety of religious groups across the country. But the Nigerian government is moving to douse any fear that the country's security challenges are religiously motivated. CGTN's Deji Badamosi has more on the story.
When U.S. President Donald Trump threatened military intervention in Nigeria to stop the alleged killing of Christians by terrorists in the north of the country, the Nigerian government vehemently rejected the U.S. president's characterization of the country's security challenges along religious lines. After a high-level meeting by officials of both countries, a deal was struck on improved security coordination between both countries. That deal resulted in a U.S. airstrike on militant targets in the northwest Sokoto state in December, in cooperation with the Nigerian government. The U.S. followed that up with providing Nigeria with more security equipment in its war against the militants. And in a move to bolster U.S. support for its fight against terrorism, the Nigerian government has hired a Washington-based lobbying firm to defend the country's international reputation and constantly brief the U.S. government on its security efforts. The contract, valued at $4.5 million for an initial period of 6 months, is a big talking point in the country.
If you see the extreme narrative coming from the U.S., it which shows that a lot of people have been doing the lobbying and trying to push the narrative of Christian genocide and all manner of insecurity within the country. Now, if you let that get ahead of you, what then happens is that it affects investors' confidence, public morale, as well as diplomatic relations. And you don't want that, especially when you're at the time you're doing reforms, you're trying to rejig the economy, and you're trying to also get investors to come in. Now, if all these narratives get ahead of you, and you no longer can control it, then it becomes a problem. So it was very important that Nigeria began to look at, okay, how do we begin to have our own counter narrative to say this is what exactly is going on within the country.
The Nigerian government has not disclosed much about the deal and the process through which the contract was awarded to a U.S. Republican-linked PR firm. But some PR experts argue that the deal is appropriate, adding that Nigeria's effort to tackle insecurity are often misunderstood internationally, and that managing the global narrative is an essential part of the wider security strategy.
I'm seeing a shift. You and I can understand that there's been some level of shift in the narrative from the initial position of, oh, Christians are being killed, to, oh, okay, Muslims are Christians are being killed. And this is the general problem within the northern part of Nigeria. So that engagement is going on at that level. Then the other thing, whether due process was being followed. I think transparency is quite important, and how they've gone about it, if they've gone about it within the ambit of procedures and the law to engage this firm, or is it like it remains within the powers of the executive to say, it's part of my function, I can go on and do this. Whatever the case is, so long as they're carrying Nigerians along, to say this is what we're doing and this is how we're going about doing it, I think all of us will be fine.
Security analysts say the decision to engage a lobbyist is not really a bad idea, adding that international advocacy must be matched with stronger action at home.
This year's budget is the largest ever since Nigeria. So that also shows you that government is concerned and they're allocating money in the defense and security subsector, even though we have some challenges in fully backing those budget appropriation. So we use multidimensional approaches to achieve results. While they are deploying lobbying, they're also fighting, and you agree with me that Nigerian forces, since the threat from Trump and the collaboration, we have been making huge successes.
Indeed, the narrative is shifting gradually. The U.S. appears to have also toned down on its initial tough rhetoric. On its part, the Nigerian government has scaled up its military operations against terrorists, especially in the north of the country, recording series of gains in recent times. But the January attack on 2 churches in those remote communities in Kaduna State is a clear indication that authorities still have to do more to stop the militants and their tracks. DG Badimosi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Let's turn to Ethiopia now, and the chairperson of the African Union Commission has called for dialogue as concerns grow over the renewed violence in the northern Tigray region. Fresh clashes are reported to have erupted 3 years after a peace deal that ended a brutal civil war between the army and the regional Tigray People's Liberation Front. Mahmoud Ali Yusuf called on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to work towards the preservation of the peace deal. Meanwhile, as CGTN's Enoch Sokolia reports, flights into Tigray have been canceled as residents struggle to get emergency funds from local banks.
Long queues were witnessed outside banks in Mekele, the capital of Ethiopia's Tigray region, as residents looked to withdraw money for emergency purposes. This follows renewed clashes between the army and the Tigray People's Liberation Front in Semlet, western Tigray. The area is claimed by forces from the neighboring Amhara region, who have refused to withdraw despite a peace agreement signed in Pretoria that ended a long conflict in 2022. Many queuing at the banks have been left angry. They are only allowed to withdraw the equivalent of $13 US.
I came here and queued because I heard there was no cash in the other branches. They gave me only 2,000 Ethiopian birrs. I was in the queue from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. and have received only 2,000. Now I'm going back home.
Ethiopian Airlines cancelled flights to Tigray on Thursday, with diplomatic and security sources hinting at a worsening situation. Airlines officials, speaking on condition of anonymity, told the media that flights were suspended for operational reasons. Local residents are already feeling the pinch.
Today, many families have been told that there are no flights for a reason that is not clear to us, and people are suffering due to cancellations. In addition, the people of Tigray, including those in Mekelle, are suffering as they can't access their own savings properly because of the long queues and the limit of 2,000 Ethiopian birrs.
The renewed tensions risk a return to conflict in the volatile region, which 3 years ago emerged from a brutal war that the African Union says killed at least 600,000 people. Enoxi Kolia, CGTN.
Well, let's cross over to Addis Ababa, where our correspondent Becca Toma is standing by. Becca, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Becca, how would you describe the situation on the ground right now? What do we know?
The situation on the ground appears to be very tense, and there are lots of uncertainties as we're hearing a renewed clash in western Tigray at a place called Salamti starting yesterday. And we're also hearing some kind of military movement in southern part of Tigray. These areas have been occupied by the Amhara regional forces since 2022, when the 2-year conflict was ended by cessation of hostilities agreement, which was brokered by the African Union, and now we're also hearing people are evacuating these areas, fearing of escalated hostilities. Of course, there is no official communication, both from the Tigray region and the federal government. We haven't heard anything as of yet, but political parties in the Tigray region are expressing concern that this escalation of hostilities must be contained, and then both parties come to dialogue. This call is also echoed by the African Union. African Union called for restraint and return to the dialogue. So the situation on the ground appears to be very tense and uncertain.
All right, Becca, picking up on the tense situation, the clashes prompted a suspension of flights. We reported that earlier. Has there been any change to that?
There has been no change to the flight. The flights between Addis Ababa and various cities across the Tigray region remain suspended. The Ethiopian Airlines communicated passengers yesterday saying that the flights were suspended due to unplanned circumstances. We actually don't understand what that means, but we understand that it's related with the renewed conflicts in the region. And we're also hearing not only flights, but also road transports are somehow, disrupted. People are expressing their concerns on social media, saying that many are stranded in the Tigray region, and there's also no official communication from the Ethiopian Airlines whether there is a plan to lift suspension or whether the suspension will be there for for the unseen future. So it's still there, no change in terms of flight suspension, Richard.
All right, Becca, on the subject of renewed conflict, the region is still recovering from a conflict 3 years ago. How are people responding to these renewed tensions, and what are you hearing, most importantly, from the residents on the ground?
Yes, the region has not recovered from the conflict. According to local officials, there are some, nearly 1 million people displaced during that conflict are still in makeshift camps across different parts in Tigray region. So the wounds are still fresh. People are very now, we're hearing people are very concerned. In fact, not only concerned, but also they are started evacuating areas where conflicts are reported and where there is a military movement. Particularly, we're hearing people are evacuating southern Tigray, fleeing to nearby towns. Particularly the youth from the Tigray part are, evacuating that area, fearing forced conscription into the military. And elsewhere in Ethiopia, people are expressing concerns because that war, which lasted between 2020 and 2022, impacted not only Tigray region, but also the impacts were felt across the country and elsewhere in the country. People are expressing concern, and they are calling for restraints and for calm, and somehow for the leaders to return to dialogue and not to go into full-blown war.
All right, let's leave it there for now. Becca, Toma, and Addis Ababa, thanks for that. Now to South Sudan, where the international community is calling for a major de-escalation in tensions there and the resumption of meaningful dialogue between the opposing sides. The call comes as fighting between the government troops and Sudan's People's Liberation Army, or SPLA-IO, has intensified in Jonglei State, just northeast of the capital, Juba. The SPLA-IO is an armed group run by the opposition leader and suspended First Vice President Riek Machar, who's facing charges of murder and crimes against humanity. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
Government troops, known as South Sudan's People's Defense Forces, claim to have pushed out opposition forces from two areas in the northeastern part of Jonglei State near the border with Ethiopia. However, the opposition SPLA-IO is refuting the claim, but as fighting continues, the United Nations says more than 230,000 people are now displaced. Some have fled to Ethiopia as asylum seekers. Many members of the international community are calling for de-escalation of tensions.
The EU is concerned about developments here in South Sudan right now. The increased and intensified violence that we have seen over the last few days is really of utmost concern. There is a clear need for more dialogue and for political agreements to stop the violence and come back to the implementation of the peace agreement.
The SPLA-IO says it is fighting because President Kiir's government has failed to implement the agreement of 2018 that ended 5 years of brutal civil war in the East African country. South Sudan's government says it is only fighting in self-defense, but it has sent in thousands of troops to Jonglei State and has asked civilians to evacuate SPLA-IO controlled areas. The UK is adding its voice to international calls, asking that the warring sides ensure civilians are protected, but there appears to be no end in sight to the violence, which has now displaced almost 250,000 people. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Burkina Faso's military-led government has dissolved all political parties and scrapped the legal framework governing their operations. Interior Minister Emile Zerbo says the decision was part of a broader effort to rebuild the state after widespread abuses and dysfunction in the country's multi-party system. The presidency under Captain Ibrahim Traoré had previously stated that the proliferation of political parties caused abuses, deepened divisions among citizens, and undermined the social fabric. A draft law for the dissolution of these parties will be sent to the Transitional Legislative Assembly, and their assets will be transferred to the state. Traoré took power in a coup in 2022, vowing to return the country to civilian rule within 2 years. Before that, the country had over 100 registered political parties, with 15 represented in parliament after the 2020 general election. The U.S. has sent one of its top diplomats to Africa on a trade mission. On Wednesday, the African Union Commission chairperson Mahmoud Ali Yusuf welcomed Christopher Landau, who is the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State to the Commission's headquarters in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Yusuf said their discussions centered on trade and investment, but he also addressed concerns regarding Washington's travel restrictions that impact African citizens.
The United States wants to be present in Africa. We think there's many advantages for Africa and for the United States. So we talked a lot about economic opportunities, particularly these corridors. The Libido corridor, I think, is a great example in which Africa can take great pride.
So there are a number of question marks that we have. We raised them. And we also raised our concern for the restrictions on visas that the United States is imposing on African citizens. And we even expressed our surprise to hear that African fans of African football teams that have been qualified to the World Cup could not make it to the United States. We raised all those issues because we need to have outspoken, frank discussions with the United States.
Hundreds of actors and film industry players in South Africa have taken to the streets of Cape Town over funding cuts. Rallying outside Parliament on Wednesday, they say the cuts have been pushing the industry towards collapse. They also blamed the government for neglecting the sector, leading to loss of jobs. In a statement, a coalition of industry organizations said that project approval meetings had stalled, bringing production activity to a halt. South Africa hosts one of the continent's most established film and television industries and has long been a destination for international productions.
We're here today because government has largely ignored the sector, the film and television sector, the screen sector. And what has happened is that the DTIC, our Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, has maladministered the film and television rebate. That has led to a loss of jobs. That has led to business going to other countries, and we are losing out on work as South Africans.
We are losing work, we're losing money. The SA film, people don't understand. They think that we're earning so much money, but actually we are suffering. Our families are suffering. The people that work in the film and television industry are suffering. We're not getting funding.
Time now for a short break. Our business segment is up next. Here are the headlines. Coming up in business news, Uganda's government revises its economic growth projections downwards. And Zambia nears a debt restructuring deal with the Frexim Bank in its efforts to finally exit default status. Well, welcome into our business segment. Let's turn to Uganda, where the government has made a sharp downward revision in its economic growth projections. Shared in a post on X late on Thursday, the finance ministry said the economy would only expand between 6.5% and 7% in the financial year starting July, well down on the previous estimate of 10.4%. It did not give an explanation for the revision, and the economy was expected to see a boost from the start of oil production. Plans are underway to begin pumping crude reserves in its western fields by the middle of this year. The project is operated by France Total Energies and the China National Offshore Oil Corporation. Well, meanwhile, the East African country has also announced plans to slash its external budget support by around 84% year on year in the next financial year. Also on X, the country's finance ministry said such support, which typically comes in the form of loans and grants, was projected to fall to around $93 million, and that's down from the previous year's $586 million. The East African economy also plans on cutting domestic debt issuance by 21.1% in next year's financial year. The move comes as the government accelerates efforts to ramp up domestic revenues to help trim its ballooning public debt. Zambia's government says it's hopeful it can agree to debt restructuring terms with Afreximbank, despite the matter being under arbitration. Treasury Secretary Felix Nkulakusa said officials are in talks with the financial institution. A dispute over whether the Southern African country must restructure its debts to Afreximbank have complicated and extended its painful path out of debt default. Zambia, which defaulted in 2020, has reached agreements with creditors for 94% of the debt it wants to restructure. Nkulakusa said the government believed the remaining 6% will be done very, very soon. But an unresolved issue over whether Afreximbank and the Trade and Development Bank should also take a hit or be spared from write-downs has prevented Lusaka from completing the process and exiting default. Afrexim and TDB account for just under 8% of the debt Zambia has earmarked for restructuring, but given what's at stake, it's proving a difficult impasse to overcome. Zambia's gross domestic product is expected to grow by 5.8% this year and 6.4% next year. South Africa has scored a significant win for both its reputation and economy after being removed from the European Union's list of high-risk third country jurisdictions. Analysts say it should ease costly financial scrutiny on cross-border transactions with Europe. The decision follows South Africa's exit from the Financial Action Task Force Grey List and the UK's high-risk money laundering register in 2025, marking a critical step in restoring investor confidence. Altogether, though, it's one of 6 African countries to be struck off the list. CGTN's Beryl Aurora has more.
South Africa was automatically red-flagged by the European Union after a 2023 grey listing by the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, a global body fighting money laundering and terrorism and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The restrictions forced European banks to intensify scrutiny of South African-linked transactions, adding friction to cross-border trade and investment.
There's really good news in South Africa coming off the grey list. It speaks about institutional strength. It speaks about our ability to, get from policy proposals, implementation. So all of that is overwhelmingly good, or on balance good. And it comes at a time when South Africa has also been, for the first time, received an upgrade by ratings agencies.
The EU's decision comes on the back of the G20 summit in Johannesburg, where it held successful talks with South Africa to strengthen trade relations and enhance collaboration in green energy and sustainable minerals. The parties also agreed to reinforce their commitment to democracy, multilateralism, and what it called a fairer, more sustainable world.
Everyone, now wants to expand and diversify trade partnerships as much as possible, and this is another effort at the EU at achieving, precisely that. The likelihood is that they're going to expand as much as possible similar, actions, and even others that are not necessarily, finance related, with other regions of the world, to reduce that reliance on the US market.
South Africa put in the hours to clear its name. But analysts say Pretoria must stay vigilant to curb illicit activity, especially within its own borders.
South Africa is seeing industries being challenged, compromised by illicit goods, illegal trade, and what immediately comes to mind is the tobacco industry with the recent announcement of the closure of a factory, and that is the result of illegal activity, illicit activity. So that means that the risk, whilst moderated or mitigated, isn't gone. We've got work to do.
South Africa is not the only country in the clear. Burkina Faso, Mali, Mozambique, Nigeria and Tanzania have also been struck off the list after strengthening their anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regimes, opening the door to deeper trade ties with the EU. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Inflation in Zimbabwe has returned to single digits. This marks a rare turning point for an economy long associated with hyperinflation, currency collapses, and chronic price instability. Official data shows annual inflation slowed sharply to 4.1% in January from 15% in December and 10.1% a year earlier. This drop comes as the country's gold-backed currency strengthens amid record bullion prices. The finance ministry says it was largely driven by policies introduced under the leadership of President Nta. It added that the government's foreign assets reserves backing the ZiG have climbed from about $276 million in April 2024 to $1.2 billion by the end of last year. Multinational steelmaker ArcelorMittal has extended a long-term agreement with the government of Liberia on mining and shipping of minerals, and that's according to the company. This brings its total investments in the country to $3.5 billion. The steelmaker says they extended the duration of the existing agreement until 2050 with an option to renew for a further 25 years. ArcelorMittal says it will pay the government $200 million for the extension of mining rights and reserved access to railroad capacity. It says the deal also addresses the government's desire to make the Côte to Buchanan rail corridor accessible to multiple users. This agreement, alongside the recent opening of ArcelorMittal's iron ore concentrator in Nimba County, has made Liberia an important mineral development center in West Africa. And now to the Somali capital, Mogadishu, for the 27th Horn of Africa Initiative ministerial meeting. Organizers say the meeting focused on expanding energy access and boosting investment across the region. With Ethiopia's hydroelectric projects, Djibouti's solar projects, and Somalia's untapped oil and gas potential, analysts say energy infrastructure is becoming a key driver of regional connectivity. Mohammed Kahir reports from Mogadishu.
During the one-day meeting, ministers and development partners highlighted how energy can act as catalyst for sustainable development across Horn of Africa. The gathering also underscored Somalia's growing role as regional leader, making its return to the international stage. Horn of African countries are looking to tap into the recently inaugurated Ethiopian dam as part of regional initiative to expand energy access and attract investment.
So together, our aim is to come together as we did in the trade, or we are working toward a trade facilitation, as we are working together in full-fledged integrated economies in our region. Energy will be the backbone of also toward that integration.
Officials from Djibouti say they are a strategically located country at a key maritime route connecting Africa and Asia, will act as big to export affordable energy to Gulf and Middle East markets.
Djibouti, for instance, suggested this morning, today, during the 27th meeting of Horn of Africa Initiative, to build enough capacity and invest together and supply energy, including to the Middle East, as the Gulf countries or the Middle East is only distant from East Africa, around 20 kilometers away from especially Djibouti coastal. Abundant energy available in Ethiopia, which we are also planning to make available in Djibouti, especially in the geothermal energy, as well as most of the East Africa countries could not only trade among them in the Horn, but also trade energy toward the Middle East.
With offshore oil and gas exploration complete, Somalia is scheduled to begin drilling in the first half of this year. This is expected to significantly boost the Horn of Africa's energy sector.
We are catalyzing all actions so that we ensure that the Somali people have a greater access to energy, affordable and reliable energy.
Despite ambitious energy plans across the Horn of Africa, The region still needs to improve its infrastructure to enhance connectivity. Mohamed Kahi, Global Business, Mogadishu, Somalia.
A bit of news now from the world of sport in our sports segment. Here are the headlines. Ahead in sports, Senegal strongly defends its team, players, and coach following heavy sanctions from CAF over the AFCON finals chaos.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Welcome into Sport on Africa Live with me, Richard Nta. Let's talk a bit of football. Senegal has come out in strong defense of its football team and head coach Pape Thiaw after African football's governing body, CAF, handed the continental champions heavy sanctions. Hefty fines and player suspensions resulted from the chaos that erupted during the AFCON finals against the host Morocco earlier this month. Senegal was fined $615,000 for what CAF described as the improper and unsporting conduct of its supporters, their players, and staff, which brought the game into disrepute. Thiaw was handed a 5-match suspension and a $100,000 fine. Everton's Richard Nta and Ismail Assar were given 2-game suspensions for their unsporting behavior towards the referee. And speaking to the press in Dakar on Thursday, Sports Minister Katie Diene-Gay said they will explore legal avenues and other options to mitigate the sanctions. Senegal won that match 1-0 after extra time.
Nous avons déjà échangé avec le président de la fédération.
We have already spoken with the President of the Federation, and we will do everything that can possibly be done. We will explore legal avenues and other options to mitigate these sanctions. He was banned for 5 matches, which is excessive, and there's also a financial fine.
Meanwhile, Morocco didn't get off scot-free. The hosts were fined $315,000 for inappropriate behavior by ball boys and improper conduct of their players and staff, as well as their fans. Ismail Saibri was handed a $100,000 fine, while Captain Ashraf Hakimi got a 2-game ban for unsupportive behavior. CAF rejected Morocco's appeal to strip Senegal of the title, with the verdict receiving huge backlash from Moroccan fans on social media. One popular social media personality on Moroccan football posted, quote, "We feel exactly the same as the day we lost the AFCON finals. Disgusted," close quote. The CAF Champions League continues this weekend with match day 4 of the group stage, and what is a reversal of the fixtures from match day 3 a week ago. Clubs across the continent are now entering a decisive phase in the race for places in the quarterfinals. Group C action gets underway tonight as Al Hilal of Sudan face Mamelodi Sundowns in a top-of-the-table clash in Benghazi. The sides are separated only by goal difference, with the South African Giants on top. They drew 2-2 in Pretoria last Friday night. Italy is entering the final stretch of preparations for the Milano Cortina Winter Olympics, with just 1 week to go until the opening ceremony. The Games, the first under Zimbabwe's Kirsty Coventry as IOC president, will be held at sites across northern Italy, with organizers expressing confidence despite lingering infrastructure challenges. Milan will host the ice events, with the remainder being held in various clusters, including Cortina. The event will welcome more than 3,500 athletes from 93 countries, and they will compete for 195 medals in 16 Olympic disciplines. Coventry has been emphasizing the significance of these games.
The venue, the rooms are beautiful. Being able to go and see where the gym would be and where the dining hall, which again has some historic moment, which again is what Italy is known for, is blending history and culture and passion. So it's been a fabulous day so far. We're excited to be here.
And former world boxing champion Anthony Joshua has broken his silence on the car crash in Nigeria that claimed the lives of 2 of his closest friends. The The 36-year-old was involved in a car crash near Lagos on December the 29th, which killed Sina Gami and Lateef Ayodele. On Thursday, the British star released an emotional video tribute reflecting on his loss and the bond he shared with the men.
What can I say? One day my time will come, and I'm not scared either, at all. It's actually comforting knowing that I've got two brothers on the other side. You know, I've lost people before, but I don't think I've lost people like that, my left and my right, you know. Throughout this, journey that I've been on, you know, it's not easy, but I didn't even realize that I'm the big guy, you know what I mean? But I was walking with giants, man, that kept me protected, kept me shielded.
And a bit of news from the world tennis. Carla Alcaraz produced one of the most dramatic Australian Open semifinal victories in history, overcoming a severe bout of cramps to defeat Alexander Zverev in a 5.5-hour marathon. Despite leading by 2 sets, the world number one looked down and out in the 5th set as the big German had the chance to serve for the match and a place in Sunday's finals. However, the Spaniard broke him, not once but twice, in an epic conclusion to take the 5th set 7-5. It was an extraordinary match that included 3 tiebreakers. Alcaraz will face either Jannik Sinner or Novak Djokovic in the final match. That match has just started. And in the women's, world number one Aryna Sabalenka has qualified for her 4th successive singles finals as the powerful Belarusian saw off the challenge of Ukraine's Elena Svitolina on Thursday. The two-time champion won the first set of their semifinals 6-2 and recovered from a breakdown in the second to claim it 6-3. Sabalenka has yet to lose a set in the tournament and seems to be getting stronger with every match. Still, the 27-year-old will likely need to be at her best to beat Elena Rybakina in the finals. The Kazakh, who's the reigning WTA finals champion, defeated Jessica Pegula in 2 sets in the other semifinals.
I cannot believe that, honestly, and yeah, that's incredible achievement, but the job not done yet, and super happy with the win. She's such a tough opponent, was playing really incredible tennis throughout the whole week, and yeah, just super happy to be through this tough match.
And to American football now, and ahead of next weekend's Super Bowl, the New England Patriots are managing early concerns in their preparations. The AFC champions held their first practice without 3 starters, including quarterback Drake May, who did not throw as he continues to nurse a shoulder injury. Head coach Mike Vrabel, however, insists there's no cause for alarm, saying the focus remains on daily preparations as the New England Patriots gets ready to face the Seattle Seahawks.
Not much. I try not to have a whole lot of concern. I just want to try to prepare the football team and make sure that everybody's ready and that we all have a plan, and not to surprise anybody, and make sure that our guys are focusing on the 1st and 2nd down plan. I know that's we've tried to map out the week here or week and a half and not look at the end of it, but focus on what we can do today. Try to learn our opponent and be ready for 1st and 2nd down.
Well, that is it for this edition of Africa Live. Remember, you can send us your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on digital media platforms. For the team, I'm Richard Nta saying thank you so much for watching, and we'll have more Africa Live coming your way in 6 hours' time. So stay tuned and stay here on CGTN.